Something happened on camera that suddenly put Phil Mickelson back at the center of professional golf's biggest unresolved question, and the accusation that followed was far more explosive than anyone expected. Rory McIlroy stood in front of cameras last week and said it directly. Phil Mickelson blew up professional golf, open and shut. The man destroyed the sport by joining LIV in 2022. It's been 4 years, 4 full years since Phil shook that Saudi hand. LIV Golf was supposed to dominate. Unlimited money, world-class players, the future of golf, except it's not. In mid-2026, the Saudi PIF pulled funding. LIV canceled their Michigan team finale. They're now searching for a mystery investor while laying off staff. The league that was supposed to reshape professional golf imploded in weeks. So if Phil Mickelson destroyed professional golf by joining LIV, if his betrayal fractured the sport into a civil war, then LIV's collapse should have fixed everything. The PGA Tour should have healed. Golf should be restored. Players should be reunited. But that's not what happened. The PGA is still hemorrhaging players. It's still losing sponsors. It's still bleeding viewers. Rory McIlroy stayed loyal. He defended the PGA Tour while it slowly fell apart around him. And here's the question nobody wants to ask. If Phil's the villain who destroyed golf, why isn't golf fixed now that he's been exposed and LIV has failed? What if Rory's accusation is technically right but strategically wrong? What if Phil didn't blow up golf at all? What if he exposed that golf was already broken? This is the story nobody's telling. So, here's my question for you. When you look at professional golf right now, do you think someone actually destroyed it, or do you think it was already dying? Drop your answer in the comments. Drop your city too if you're comfortable sharing. And if this reframes how you see what happened in 2022, then subscribe, because we're about to pull back the curtain on everything golf has been hiding. 4 years. That's how long one accusation has been echoing through professional golf. 4 years of repeating the same narrative. 4 years of everyone pointing at the same person and saying the same thing. But what if the accusation everyone keeps repeating is technically correct and fundamentally incomplete? August 19th, 2026, BMW Championship. A reporter asks Rory McIlroy a direct question about what happened in 2022, about the choice that fractured professional golf, about the decision that turned champions into enemies, about why the best sport in the world became a civil war. Rory stands there. The cameras are watching. Millions will hear his answer. And he says something that sounds true because it looks true when you look at the evidence, but the evidence you're seeing might be showing you the surface of something much deeper. Professional golf is shattered. That's real. Players are separated across competing tours. Fans don't know which tournament matters. The sport is bleeding credibility. So the narrative makes sense. Someone broke it. Someone chose money over loyalty. Someone decided their ego mattered more than the integrity of the game. Everyone agrees on who that someone is. But what if I told you that professional golf was dying before that someone ever joined LIV? What if the system itself was so fundamentally broken that a single player's departure could split it in half? What if the accusation everyone keeps repeating actually reveals something completely different when you look at what it's not saying? Then the accusation changes shape entirely. It's no longer, how could this person do this to golf? It becomes, how is golf so fragile that this person's decision destroyed it? And that question, the one hiding inside the accusation, is the question that changes everything. Because here's what Rory said that August morning. His exact words, the quote that gets replayed on every sports show, in every article, in every debate about who really destroyed professional golf. He said something that sounds like blame, something that sounds like an answer, something that sounds like the final word on what happened and why it matters. But it's not the final word. It's actually the first question masquerading as a statement. And 4 years of repeating this accusation, they've obscured what it actually means. They've hidden what it actually reveals. They've prevented everyone from asking what happens when you look at the evidence, not to confirm the accusation, but to understand why the accusation was even possible in the first place. This is the investigation professional golf doesn't want you to understand, not because it blames someone new, but because it reveals something much more uncomfortable, that the entire system was broken, that the fracture wasn't caused by one person's decision. It was revealed by one person's decision. And there's a profound difference between those two things. One makes someone a villain, the other makes an entire institution complicit. To understand what actually happened to professional golf, you need to understand three things. First, why Rory's accusation sounds true and feels justified. Second, and why what happened to both tours could completely change the way we understand Phil's role in the collapse, despite LIV having essentially unlimited capital and the PGA having decades of institutional advantage. Third, why both failures together prove that Phil wasn't the villain in this story. He was the exposer. He was the person brave or reckless enough to reveal what the golf establishment didn't want anyone to see. The narrative I'm about to walk you through will challenge everything you think you know about who actually destroyed professional golf. It will make you question whether anyone destroyed it at all, or whether it was simply dying, and Phil's departure made the death visible. But before I do that, I need to know something from you. So let's start exactly where this story starts, with what Rory actually said, and let's examine the precise words he used, because there's more buried in that statement than people realize on the surface. Rory's accusation, delivered on August 19th, 2026. Yeah, were there some things at the start of LIV that the PGA Tour could have done better? Sure, but the guys that went, especially Phil, if he was unhappy with some stuff, surely that just warranted a conversation instead of blowing the entire professional game up and doing something else. This is the bombshell. This is the accusation that defines the current moment in professional golf. And it's devastating precisely because it sounds logical. It sounds reasonable. It sounds like Phil looked at a situation, got frustrated, and chose greed over loyalty. But here's what Rory's statement accidentally reveals when you read between the lines. You're thinking, okay, so Phil left, golf broke, Rory's right about what happened. But that's the surface reading. That's what everyone believes. That's the predictable narrative. The real story sits underneath that easy interpretation. Phil Mickelson didn't just wake up in 2022 and decide to betray professional golf on a whim. His frustration with the PGA Tour went back years, decades actually. He'd been complaining about tour economics for longer than most current players have been alive. The tour had a fundamentally broken business model. Player compensation lagged far behind what other professional sports offered. Media rights were undervalued. The tour was hemorrhaging sponsors even before Saudi Arabia entered the picture. Viewership had been declining on cable for years. Young players had no economic incentive to stay committed to the PGA's traditional path. The tour leadership was slow to adapt to modern sports marketing. Everything was structured for a version of professional golf that no longer existed. When Saudi Arabia came calling with unlimited financial resources, Phil didn't jump at the opportunity to create chaos. He jumped at the only leverage point that actually existed to force the PGA Tour to change course. Here's where the story gets interesting. Let's decode what Rory's accusation actually means when you stack it against the facts. Phil should have had a conversation instead of blowing up the game. But a conversation with who? With a PGA Tour leadership that had refused to reform for years? With a system that was already failing? Phil tried conversations multiple times. They didn't work. The tour wasn't listening, so he found leverage, because here's what nobody predicted. The Defectors League collapsed. The Loyal League is still falling apart. And if both paths failed, if both the revolutionary move and the loyal stance ended in institutional failure, then maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't Phil's choice at all. It was golf itself. Let's trace the timeline, because the collapse of both leagues reveals something that nobody in professional golf wanted to admit. LIV Golf launched in 2022 with essentially unlimited Saudi funding. The PIF, Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, was genuinely committed to reshaping professional golf. They had billions in capital. They had the world's best defectors: Phil Mickelson, Dustin Johnson, Bryson DeChambeau, Jon Rahm. They had a massive marketing machine. They had no expense constraints whatsoever. By 2025, LIV looked unstoppable. It genuinely seemed like Saudi money could fix anything that was broken about professional golf. The tour was young, aggressive, and backed by seemingly infinite capital. Everyone assumed this would dominate the landscape for decades. Then, in mid-2026, everything changed. Three things happened in rapid succession that nobody expected. First, the Saudi PIF pulled funding. Second, LIV canceled their Michigan team finale and went into crisis mode. Third, they laid off staff, froze operations, and went searching for a mystery new investor. The league that was supposed to dominate professional golf for decades imploded in weeks. A tour backed by billions in capital, managed by experienced sports executives, staffed with major champions, simply couldn't sustain itself. So what does that tell you? What does that reveal about the fundamental problems with professional golf? But here's where it gets weird. While LIV was imploding, the PGA Tour didn't stabilize. Instead, it continued deteriorating. It lost players to LIV who were trying to negotiate exits. Sponsors kept abandoning it because they didn't want to be seen as anti-innovation. TV ratings stayed flat or declined. It still hadn't reformed its player compensation model. It was still arguing with LIV instead of fixing itself. This is where the story stops making sense if you believe Rory's accusation. If Phil broke golf, then LIV's failure should have fixed everything. The league that supposedly blew up the sport should collapse, and the established tour should heal. Life should return to normal. Stability should return. Instead, both are dying. The PGA is still bleeding players. LIV is a zombie searching for investors. The best golfers in the world are stuck in institutional limbo, unable to compete against each other in any meaningful way. Neither tour model works, neither approach succeeded. Both failed simultaneously. The point is devastating. Even with LIV's collapse, the PGA couldn't capitalize. Even with the defector league imploding, the loyal tour couldn't heal itself because the PGA's problems weren't caused by LIV. LIV just exposed them. LIV forced the problems to the surface, but it didn't create them. At this point, you might be thinking, wait, if LIV is gone, if the Saudi money disappears, why isn't golf fixed? And honestly, that's the right question. That's the question that keeps you from settling into a comfortable narrative. Drop that exact question in the comments. What do you think is happening? Why is the PGA still broken if its rival league imploded? And don't forget to subscribe, because the answer I'm about to give you is the one that nobody in professional golf wants to hear. This is the answer that explains everything. Here's the story that Rory's accusation accidentally tells, even though he doesn't intend to tell it. Phil Mickelson didn't blow up professional golf. He exposed that professional golf was already blown up. Before Phil ever shook the Saudi hand in 2022, the PGA Tour's business model was obsolete. Player compensation was fundamentally misaligned with market value. Media rights were severely undervalued. The tour was losing cultural relevance to younger audiences who didn't watch cable. Sponsors were questioning their ongoing investment. Viewership was declining year over year. Phil didn't create this crisis. He simply had the visibility and the leverage to respond to it in a way that nobody could ignore. Think about this logically. If professional golf was actually healthy, would one player's departure fracture the entire sport? A healthy league loses stars all the time and recovers. The NBA loses players to other leagues. The Premier League loses players to other competitions. But those sports don't split in half. They don't collapse into warfare. The fact that Phil's departure could split professional golf into two warring camps proves something fundamental. The foundation was already rotten. The system was already failing. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. Rory stayed loyal to the PGA Tour. That loyalty is admirable. It's defensible. It's understandable. But loyalty to a broken system is just complicity. Rory defended the tour while it continued losing players, sponsors, and cultural relevance. He positioned himself as the hero for staying loyal while the system he defended slowly disintegrated around him. Let's decode what that means. Rory and Phil were both victims of an institution that failed them both. Phil had to blow it up because the dialogue failed. Rory had to stay and watch it fail. Neither man won. Both were trapped in a dying system. Here's where you might think the story ends. Okay, so golf was broken. Both tours were destined to fail anyway. It's not Phil's fault. It's not Rory's fault. It's nobody's fault. That's the comfortable ending. That's the narrative that makes everyone feel better. That's the story where everyone gets to feel like they tried their best within a broken system. But that's not where this goes. Because if golf was broken, and if both tours have now collapsed, trying to fix it in different ways, then the accusation changes shape completely. The question becomes darker. It becomes, what does professional golf actually need to survive? And the answer to that question, the one neither Rory nor Phil nor anyone in golf leadership wants to admit, is the one that changes everything. Professional golf doesn't need Rory McIlroy to be right about Phil Mickelson. Golf doesn't need Phil Mickelson to be vindicated. What golf needs is a complete structural overhaul, and that's a conversation that professional golf is actively avoiding. Here's what professional golf actually requires to survive the next decade. First, golf needs one coherent tour structure, not the PGA versus LIV, not competing billionaires. One unified tour with multiple brands, multiple tiers, and clear pathways for players at every level. The current fragmentation isn't competition, it's self-destruction. Second, professional golf needs equitable player economics. Real compensation aligned with market value, transparent sponsor revenue sharing, a sustainable model that doesn't depend on one billionaire's changing interests or one institutional board's strategic decisions. Third, golf needs a modern business model built for 2026, not 1986. Digital-first media strategy, engagement with audiences under 40, sponsorship models that reflect current market realities. A professional tour that understands its sport is competing for attention against everything on the internet. Fourth, golf needs strategic unification around the sport itself, not around protecting turf or defending legacy institutions. Remember at the beginning when we asked, if Phil blew up golf, why isn't it fixed now that LIV collapsed? Here's the answer. Because golf's problem was never one man. It was an institution incapable of evolution. And institutions like that don't fix themselves. They die slowly while their leaders argue about who was right. Rory's accusation against Phil was technically accurate, it was factually correct, but it was strategically useless. It felt good to have a villain, it felt good to defend the traditional tour, but while golf felt good arguing about Phil's supposed betrayal, it stopped noticing that the entire sport was failing. And that's when the accusation finally flips. Phil didn't destroy professional golf, he exposed a system that was already breaking, and Rory's accusation may have accidentally revealed exactly how fragile that system had become. Phil Mickelson blew up professional golf. That's the accusation. That's the story. That's the villain they all identify when they tell themselves what happened in 2022. But what if the accusation is technically true and completely wrong at the same time? It's true because Phil's departure exposed something. He pulled back the curtain. He showed what was happening underneath the carefully maintained facade. He made it impossible to pretend the system was working when it clearly wasn't. In that sense, the literal sense, he did blow something up. He detonated a hidden fracture. He revealed a break that was already there. But it's wrong because it makes you think the problem was never about his choices or his character or his loyalty. It makes you think he caused the fracture. It makes you think he's responsible for what comes next, except he's not. He's a symptom. He's the moment the disease became visible. Think about what's happened since. LIV has been a financial disaster masked by Saudi money. The PGA Tour can't generate the same capital it once could. Players are split, fans are confused, sponsors are nervous. Two tours exist, neither one is thriving, and the sport is cannibalizing itself from the inside, trying to survive. That wasn't Phil's plan. That wasn't something he could have predicted or controlled. That was the system revealing its own fragility. That was an institution built on assumptions that stopped being true the moment technology and money and global markets changed everything. So the real story isn't, how could Phil do this? The real story is, how was professional golf so broken that one player's departure could destroy it? But nobody wants to ask that question because that question doesn't have a villain. It doesn't have a hero. It just has the truth. Professional golf needed to modernize, consolidate, and evolve years ago, and it didn't. And now both tours are proving that neither model works. Not unlimited Saudi money, not institutional tradition. Neither one is sustainable, so what happens next? So for 4 years, everyone keeps saying the same thing. They repeat Rory's accusation. They point at Phil. They tell themselves a story where one person made one choice and destroyed a sport. But they're not asking the harder question. They're not asking, if one person's departure destroyed professional golf, what does that say about professional golf? They're not asking, if the system was so fragile, what does that mean about all the years before Phil left? They're not asking, what if the real problem was never Phil's choice, but the choices that forced him to make that choice? And that's the investigation professional golf doesn't want you to understand, not because it blames someone new, but because it reveals that the problem isn't solved by blaming someone old. The problem is solved by asking what comes next. The real accusation, the one that actually matters, is against professional golf itself, against a sport that saw the crisis coming and chose politics over progress, against an institution that would rather blame one man than ask what needs to change, against a system so committed to protecting legacy power that it would rather die than evolve. Phil Mickelson didn't destroy professional golf. He forced it to look at itself. He created a mirror that, here's what I want to know from you. Are you a golf fan who saw this coming? Did you watch professional golf fracture in 2022 and think, something's fundamentally broken here? Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me your city or your country. More importantly, tell me what you think professional golf actually needs to survive the next decade. And subscribe if you're tired of the easy narratives. Subscribe if you want the stories that dig deeper than the surface villain. Subscribe if you think professional golf's future matters.